Thank you, Steve. So we've had some beautifully targeted talks, and I'm now going to back way away and take a very bird's eye view of conservation training. Um, and to speak specifically about it from the Durham context. So, conservation training at Durham began in 1978. In the intervening 47 years, we've trained over 240 conservators. During this period, the program has changed and evolved, and the type of student we have recruited and their goals as graduates has also changed. I thought that for the purpose of this talk, it might be interesting to delve a little into those evolutions and look at both where the program has been and where it is going, and how this impacts its relationships with the archaeological sector. My sense from my conversations with other conservation educators in the UK and abroad is that the trends that we are noting at Durham are trends that are seen across other programs. But I also want to add the caveat that conservation training programs tend to have distinctive personalities and strengths, and as a result, it can be hard to generalize across them all. The diversity is a strength of the sector. Students who are particularly interested in technical art history or archaeometry may choose one program. Students with an interest in the social justice aspects of the field may choose another, and students with an arts orientation may find a home in a third. The initial conservation course at Durham, established by Janie Cronin, was a response to the rise in developer-funded archaeology and the need for conservators to care for the finds produced. It was offered as a graduate diploma and was 3 years in length. Students were expected to already be employed by museums and units when they joined the course. They spent the first year working at their home site and doing guided learning, their second year at Durham, and their third year on a placement. Like many early conservators at other institutions, these students were often mature students who had experience in fieldwork, lab work, or had experience working within the heritage sector. Some were non-traditional students who often thought with their hands, and when asked about their career paths, many describe almost stumbling into the field rather than deliberately setting out to be conservators. After Cronin departed in 1988 and Chris Capel was hired as the program director, the course altered to a 2-year MA. This model was unique at the time, both within the university and within the sector. Other programs offering training in archaeological conservation at the time were BA or BSc courses. Since then, most conservation training has metamorphosed to the graduate level, and this is frequently considered to be the terminal degree for conservators. In 2004, the Durham course closed briefly, and in 2009, a new MA in Conservation of Museums and Archaeological Objects was launched. What you may notice is that the museums part is now coming in front of the archaeological part, a recognition of where our students were coming from. In 2024, the program was converted to an MSc in Conservation of Museums and Archaeological Objects in recognition of the fact that the scientific training routinely delivered on the program equaled the science training on our other MSCs. Like those students who apply to other conservation programs, our students have typically found out about conservation either prior to entering university for their undergraduate degrees or early in their degree courses. They have been intentionally positioning themselves for the field and have sought out pre-program experience at museums and heritage sites and taken courses to fill perceived gaps in their learning, either around the sciences or the arts. Increasingly, our international students have even designed their own BA degrees centered around conservation. They're usually cognizant of and excited about the opportunity that the field affords for interdisciplinary learning, and this is centered in the way in which we teach our students. In addition to the hand skills and the analytical skills needed within the field, and I think you've seen some great examples of those, there's increasingly a wide variety of soft skills that are central to what we teach. These include leadership, negotiation, time management, communication, and collaborative working techniques. So conservation training is often embedded within the departments of allied fields. At Durham, the program's in an archaeology department, but frequently the training remains separate from the other training in the department. And this can result in digressions between the two two sets of training. So when our program first began, the students we were recruiting primarily came from archaeological backgrounds, and this trend continued until the early 2000s. Increasingly, our students are not coming from archaeological backgrounds. They're coming from chemistry, they're coming with undergraduate degrees in biochemistry and degrees in the studio arts, and many of them see conservation as heading to museum careers and not necessarily always to archaeological careers. So that background knowledge about archaeology that other students had, the familiarity with site work and with coding and identification processes is often lacking. When our program was initially set up, because the students had that, it was allied to the museum studies program. And so many of our students took courses in tandem with our museum studies majors. So now we're needing to rethink how to add that archaeological content back into the course. Additionally, I've been thinking about our undergraduates. Many of them don't get much exposure to conservation beyond what they see looking in the glass windows of the lab or reading the posters we display in the hallway. And I've recently been thinking about how this leads to expectations within the field, and as Gretel was pointing out, the facility of communication that might occur if we're not sharing the same languages, if we're not sharing the same terminology, do we impede that communication? Within a department with a vibrant conservation program, the sole but very real constraint on engagement is staff time. But in other programs, it may be more difficult to introduce conservation content at that undergraduate level, and this often results in the transmission of old tropes about what conservation is about. In the 70s and 80s, conservation was still a fairly nascent profession. Its first professional groups were founded in the 50s and 60s, and many of the problems facing the field revolved around recognizing and characterizing decay, as well as determining what steps were most likely to ameliorate the damage seen. Conservation research initially focused on these aspects, which were regarded as technical questions by practitioners in allied fields. This situation was not helped by the fact that a lot of the activities that conservators carry out, while requiring very specialized skills, as you've already seen, could be reduced by others to mending and making activities, which are often devalued as women's work or household chores. Since these early days, conservation research and education has changed, and while elements of its former interests remain, increasingly conservators are focusing on broader issues such as heritage protection in the face of climate change, social justice, and the way in which what and how we conserve impacts approaches to decolonization and systemic resources and the interconnections between heritage and well-being. These are areas where conservation has much to offer archaeology, but because the two disciplines often publish in different venues, the work may not be readily visible. There remains an unfortunate and all too prevalent vision of conservation as a technical transaction that is often reinforced by the remoteness of conservation labs from many of the units with which they work. In this vision, conservators may render objects stable for others to research, but are not always seen as central to the research process. Objects are selected for conservation by fine specialists and returned to them for analysis after treatment, at times with minimal discussion of the project's overall research aims or goals and what conservation can contribute. And I think that's a point that Phil brilliantly brought out. Distance can obscure the collaborative synergies that often result from working more closely, and in this environment, old stereotypes are reinforced, especially if they can't be challenged. To take full advantage of these synergies, everyone must be aware of the potential for their existence. Within academia, there is more scope for conservation input into that undergraduate training. And when faced with similar problems in the US, colleagues developed plug-and-play lectures that contained introductions to materials preservation and conservation approaches, which could be rolled into undergraduate courses. The post-COVID educational toolkit has opened up additional opportunities for remote lab tours and other tools for embedding conservation in the academic program, and this is something that is worthy of pursuit. This perception of conservation as a technical pursuit can be reinforced by the UK research environment and the fact that the types of research and projects that conservators undertake are often difficult to align with a single unit of assessment within the REF cycle. I think I've managed to get my slides off kilter, so I'm just going to rush you through them and get on to one that is hard to characterize in the REF cycle. So it was also for a long time upheld with or reinforced within training institutions where we taught students to document their work, but not necessarily to write about it. So we taught them how to write great conservation reports, but we didn't necessarily teach them to interpret that further, to present that further to other audiences. One of the approaches that we've been recently implementing at Durham is to require that our second year students submit one of the elements of their final portfolio as a journal article following the forms and conventions of a selected publication. This assignment helps them to begin to conceptualize their research as not just being in pursuit of an academic credential, but also as worthy of sharing. Feedback for this assignment is aligned with the sorts of feedback that an author might receive during peer review. While not all of these student projects move on to publication, several, including one on the significance and preservation of mummified cats from castles in Denmark, and one on green solvents and conservation, are now in the process of being published. And the students have commented that although they found the exercise daunting, it has demystified the process of publishing and made it feel like something that they could more easily engage with in the future. Increasingly, our applicant base and our student cohorts are international in their makeup. There is a strong interest in conservation education in North America and China, and growing interest in places like Saudi Arabia and India. For the last 4 cohorts, more than 50% of the students have been overseas. This can be challenging as career prospects and museum expectations often differ in these countries, but it also poses a challenge for museums and archaeology in the UK. Our international students can work in this country for up to 2 years after graduation, but they are likely to return home and to take their knowledge with them. While this means that entry-level roles are likely to remain easy to fill, it suggests that what could be lost without investment or encouragement is the specialist, long-term specialist expertise that's needed to undertake projects such as the Galway Hoard or the Pembrokeshire Chariot. Um, I'm not sure entirely what the solution to that is, but I think it's a trend that is worth noting, and it's one that I leave you with at this point.